Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, brothers and sisters, for being here tonight. We have quite a large crowd and a mixed crowd as well. First time we're having many sisters with us. Many of them are my friends from MPF, Muslim Professional Forum before. And we got acquainted with Miss Rina, very important person. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Azzam Tamimi, my friend. We have known each other for like more than 10 years. So, and he's an activist, British Palestinian author of the book, famous book, HAMAS, Unwritten Chapters. And he also written a book on Rashid Ghannouchi, Democrat Within Islamism. The book which we, the Islamic Renaissance Fund, translated and published. And we invited him to launch the book. The daughter of the current Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim, Izzah, was there as well as a panelist. Yeah, it was something that we can't forget about that particular book launching session. Anyway, tonight we're talking about this book, about this story of Hamas and what's next, because so many things have been happening. Right? Can you get me the book, please? This is the book that was written by Dr. Azzam Tamimi, Hamas Unwritten Chapters. Okay, and because this book stopped where it was supposed to stop at the time of publication of the book, but there's so many things that happened afterward. And the thing is that I want to mention to you is that yesterday I received WhatsApp, and there were like photographs of I think 5 Hamas activists that were killed, including Abu Ubaidah, the speaker of Hamas, the famous speaker of Hamas, right? And at the bottom of the poster, there was written verse from Surah Al-Ahzab, verse 23. Yeah, minal mu'minina rijalun sadaqu ma ahadullah alayh wa minhum man qada nahbahu wa minhum man yantazir wa ma baddalu tabdila. Yeah, meaning to say that they are like among the believers, right? They are men who have been true to what they have vowed before Allah, right? And among them are such that have redeemed their vouch, their pledge by death, and some of them are still waiting. It's a very powerful verse, right? And the end of it was, they did not change their resolve in the list. So meaning to say that despite what we know as truce or ceasefire, the Israelis, the Zionists keep bombing and keep killing the Palestinians. So I personally, I don't see whether there's any benefit out of this truce, which you can elaborate after this. But the thing is that what we want to know and what we want to talk about as well, I think we are supposed to have a speaker, a writer, who wrote something about whether Hamas was created, just like all the other extremist groups were created by the West, by US, or by the Zionists. Or Hamas was created as well. So they thought, or they published that Hamas was created. And this is the issue that you can talk about as well. Because we discussed yesterday about what I mentioned about Ahmad Shara, how he was previously labeled as an extremist. 10 million USD was bounty was on his head, and the general who basically captured him some time ago and recently in New York was sitting with him, like me and Dr. Azzam, talking in a summit, right? So people were wondering, how could that happen, right? So they thought that many of these Islamic fundamentalists or extremists were basically created by the West or by Israelis or by Zionists themselves. And I think these are some of the issues that we want to talk about. And we want to talk about, where we're going after this. What's next? Of course, Hamas will never surrender their weapons to Israel. And that's what they wanted. That's what Trump wanted, actually, for Hamas to disarm themselves, disband themselves. And perhaps they don't want even Hamas to be a political party, right? I don't know. But I think they don't want Hamas to be a political party, because being a political party means that they can still control Gaza. Now, Gaza, is still under Hamas. And that's the thing that basically terrified the West and terrified Israelis. And I think without further ado, I'll give the session to our beloved brother Azzam Tamimi to continue.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Well, Dr. Ahmed, thank you very much. It's I treasure your friendship, and also grateful for this opportunity. Now, you see, I think what aches the West when it comes to Hamas is that they have not been able to force it to surrender. And that's very important, because the previous national liberation movement of the Palestinians, Fatah, when it came under all sorts of pressure. Of course, Fatah is the core of the PLO, because the PLO was created by the Arab League, but then later on Fatah took over and became the actual manager of the PLO. So Fatah is what matters. The Fatah leadership, which became the PLO leadership under Yasser Arafat, came under enormous pressure at various stages. First in Jordan, they were thrown out of Jordan. Then in Lebanon, they were thrown out of Lebanon. And there were massacres here and there. They assassinated a long list of their commanders and leaders. Eventually, they succumbed. And they went to Oslo. And in Oslo, they signed a surrender document called the Oslo Agreements, by which they vowed to end the armed struggle for the liberation of Palestine, and they recognized Israel as a legitimate state. Now, in the case of Hamas, they tried to do exactly the same thing. And despite the destruction, despite the death, despite the genocide, Hamas has not changed its mission or its objective. The vision is still very clear. Israel has no place in our houses, not in our land, not in my mother's house, not in my father's land. Zionism is an anti-human movement. This is our struggle. Our struggle is on behalf not just the Palestinians, not just the Arabs, and not even just the Muslims. Our struggle is on behalf of humanity, because what Zionism represents today is exactly what Nazism once represented, what fascism once represented, what even apartheid in South Africa to some extent represented, although apartheid looks very compassionate compared to Zionism, if we were to run a comparison. And Hamas has come a long way. I remember when I was approached in 2003 by my publisher, Hearst in London, who had 3 years earlier published my book on Islam and secularism. He approached me and asked, "Come, I want to talk to you." I went there and he said, "Azzam, I see Hamas emerging as a pivotal player in the Palestinian struggle." That was in 2003. And I want a book on Hamas. A few books had already been published. Some are not bad, but the majority were written from a Mossad or the CIA point of view. So he wanted a book that would honestly and fairly present Hamas to the worldwide audience. And it took me 3 years of research. I went to Japan even to finish the job. I spent about a year between Kyoto and Nagoya as a visiting professor. And as I was finishing my book, Hamas won the elections in Palestine. That proved that that publisher to be right. He had an insight. He had some sort of a foresight in to what was going on. And when I was researching Hamas, I noticed that the Israelis have resorted to the same tactics they used against Fatah. They started with eliminating activists in the field. Then they moved to assassinating higher level commanders. And then top leaders like Sheikh Ahmed Yassin and his successor, Abdul Aziz al-Rantisi, they were both assassinated within a very short period of time. And yet, rather than Hamas getting weaker, it was growing bigger and stronger and more popular. The Palestinians, behind them, the Arabs and the Muslims, were seeing this as the true alternative to what had already been really neutralized, if not totally derailed in the Oslo Accords. In my assessment of the Oslo Accords between Israel and the PLO, that was the biggest nakba the Palestinians had ever seen, because it meant that their national liberation movement was transformed into a collaborating agency working for the occupation. And this is what they're doing at the moment in Ramallah. Yet Hamas had withstood all the pressure, all the attempts to undermine it. Until today, and you referred to the poster of the five, these are actually very top commanders. I mean, including the official spokesman of the military wing, Izzuddin al-Qassam. The others were the top leaders of the movement in Gaza. But they earlier eliminated Ismail Haniyeh, eliminated Sinwar and others. Yet look at the discourse, look at the rhetoric that comes out of Hamas. Not a change. Again, that takes us to the verse. من المؤمنين رجال صدقوا ما عاهدوا الله عليه فمنهم من قضى نحبه ومنهم من ينتظر وما بدلوا تبديلا. You will find this type of people who, no matter what happens to them, they are patient, they are resilient, they are resolved to continue, because simply they would not settle for anything apart from two things: either martyrdom or victory. There's nothing else. I mean, the Quran doesn't give us any other chance. You have to determine that these are the two objectives that are legitimate. And I think so long as Hamas is committed to this, Hamas will not be defeated. No matter, forget about the material loss. Material loss can be compensated. What cannot be compensated is the moral loss. Is the loss of one's morality, one's identity, one's vision. Alhamdulillah, none of this has been affected. Now, if you really want to explore the recent history of the Palestinian issue, from the start to the end, or to this moment, we're talking about 100 years, a century of struggle. First against British colonialism, and then against Zionism. My grandfather was in the resistance. My father was in the resistance. People of my generation are in the resistance. People of my children's generations, and then my grandchildren's will be in the resistance. Which means that this is a live cause. This is not dying. The Palestinians, it is their destiny that they are the spearhead in this struggle. This is a struggle not because we lost our homes or because we lost our land. In essence, it is a struggle for the Ummah, because Zionism and the Zionist project is directed against the entire Ummah. And this is the vision that initially Fatah had when its founders met in Kuwait in 1957 and decided to launch the struggle against Zionism. That was long before 1967 and before Israel took the rest of Palestine. 1957, 2/3 of Palestine were Israel, but the rest was divided between Jordan and Egypt. And yet, a group of men met in Kuwait and decided that we need to revive the struggle which had been going on until 1948. But then when the vision was lost, and they went to Madrid, and then they went to Oslo, and concluded that deal of shame, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent somebody else. And this is what Allah tells us in Al-Quran. وَإِن تَتَوَلَّوْا يَسْتَبْدِلْ قَوْمًا غَيْرَكُمْ ثُمَّ لَا يَكُونُوا أَمْثَالَكُمْ. If you change heart, He will replace you. By who? By those who will not be like you. They will not be like you in the sense that they will not capitulate, they will not surrender, they will not give up on the sublime objective of standing for what is right and what is just. And I think no matter what happens, someone somewhere will be carrying the torch and will be leading the march forward. Of course, it is true that Hamas has suffered materially. Many of their leaders were martyred, many of their members were martyred. The Gazans lost, there is not a single family in Gaza that didn't lose a dozen or more of their immediate relatives. It's a genocide, it's a massacre. But this is the path of resistance. The Algerians went through this. An Algerian friend told me that usually people talk about Algeria as being the country of the 1 million martyrs. He asked me, do you know how many millions were martyred during the entire struggle against French colonialism? I said, how many? He said 15 million.
Oh.
15 million Algerians perished in that struggle against French colonialism. And French colonialism is very similar, or was very similar, to Zionist colonialism, because it was a settler colonialism. They wanted to remove the Algerians. They annexed the entire Algerian country. It became, suddenly, overnight, it became part of France. Look at the Vietnamese. The Vietnamese were not Muslim, yet they made so many sacrifices. They lost millions in the struggle and eventually defeated the Americans. Take another Muslim example, the Afghanis. Who would have imagined, or who would have expected that the Taliban, who were seen as bandits, armed bandits, and at least this is how their image was portrayed in much of the Western media, eventually humiliated the United States of America and forced it to withdraw. The nations that are today free, they were not free of charge. They had to pay the price for freedom. And I think the Palestinians know this. And inshallah, they will not give up. There's no question. Those of them who will give up will be replaced immediately by somebody else. So what I expect will happen is that the attempts will continue to undermine the movement, to undermine the struggle and the resistance. You know, this world is not controlled by human beings. This world is not controlled by Trump. It's not controlled by any powerful human force. It's controlled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we do our bit of homework, if we fulfill our covenants, so we were talking earlier about, all you who believe, fulfill your covenants. If we fulfill our covenants, Allah will enable the laws of nature to stand with us. This is how it works. And that's why you need real iman, real faith, strong faith, and confidence in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises to those who are willing to make their sacrifices. There are challenges, of course, and there are enormous challenges, but these challenges are not fatal. What is fatal, as I mentioned earlier, is the change of heart. So long as there is no change of heart, everything can be regenerated, can be recompensated, can be built up again. And I think it suffices, and I probably conclude with this and open this for your contributions and questions. It suffices that the sacrifices of the people of Gaza are changing the world. They're definitely changing the world. We can feel this. The sign for me is not just the change in public opinion. The stronger sign is the reaction of governments around the world to the change in public opinion. They are horrified. They're changing their laws. These democracies, these liberal democracies, are changing their laws and have decided to become less liberal or more illiberal because they're seeing public opinion in their countries change in favor of Palestine and in favor of resistance and against Zionism. This is happening in America, this is happening in Europe, happening everywhere. And the entire Arab region is boiling. The Arabs are in shackles today as masses because their governments are using unprecedented levels of repression, but this volcano will soon erupt. And when it erupts, it will be a much bigger eruption, a much powerful eruption than the one that happened in 2010, 2011, in what was known as the Arab Spring Revolutions. So you see, yes, we have incurred losses, but at the same time, if you look at the much bigger picture, the resilience of the people of Gaza has gained the cause so many good things around the world. And these combined together will hopefully, inshallah, pave the way for a change. I don't want to talk longer as a matter of introduction, but I think if we open this to our dear brothers and sisters, you might have comments to make or questions to ask, and will be more beneficial, inshallah.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khairan katsiran. Thanks, Brother Azzam. I think your last remark was very important, that there's a change in perception towards resistance. In fact, even though the axis of resistance was somehow neutralized in a way, but public opinion, especially among the youngsters, were changing. In America, you have seen that a lot of demonstrations happen in campuses all around the states, right? I think I gave an interview to ICNA, this Iranian news agency, on this particular aspect, on whether the student movement in America would change the stand of the government, like what it happened during the Vietnam War.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Same thing is being repeated.
So so I think it's a good thing that well, we are not saying that people of Palestine should continue to suffer, but we believe that this suffering, there's a kind of something which is beneficial to the rest of the world. I think with this, we open it to the floor and to anyone who if you have any questions, you can pose your questions directly to Dr. Azzam. Thank you. Yes, Friday.
Assalamualaikum. I have two questions. First one is, we know that Gaza physically and geographically cut off from the West Bank. So then while Gaza under Hamas and the West Bank under Fatah, I'm wondering, how's the sentiment of psyche of the people on the ground from both territories? Are they united about the Palestinian fight, Palestinian ambition or so on? Then secondly, also regard to the first question, what's their opinion on the ground with regard to Hamas action on the October 7? Are they also rally behind Hamas for the invasion of October 7?
Well, the sentiment of the Palestinians as a whole hasn't really changed. If you, even in the West Bank, although they have a Palestinian Authority, but they are being attacked on daily basis by the Jewish settlers. They burn their crops, they uproot their olive trees, they destroy their homes, they kill their children. So what happened in Gaza has been going on in the West Bank at a smaller scale. And it is likely to become bigger, much bigger. This is what even the Zionists themselves promised to do. That these agreements are between the Palestinian Authority on the one hand and Hamas on the other, in terms of how do we proceed. The Palestinian Authority, which is really Fatah and the PLO, believe that since they signed these deals with Israel, they should continue to hope that one day they will be allowed to have a Palestinian state next to Israel, because this is their understanding of Oslo. Oslo to them meant that one day there will be a Palestinian state somewhere. But we've seen since Oslo was signed, more and more land is confiscated every day. Even the Palestinian Authority itself is treated with utter disrespect by the Israelis, although it is providing essential security services to them. Hamas believes that, Hamas believes that there's no way forward other than the resistance. Okay, we told you, if you could get us a Palestinian state, we'll think about it, and we might agree to enter into a long-term truce with Israel, not recognizing the legitimacy of the state of Israel, because that's impossible. That cannot happen. But at least if Oslo can produce a viable Palestinian state, that is something that you can probably deal with. Even in the West now, analysts and commentators no longer speak about two-state solution. There are some stupid politicians who talk about two-state solutions, including some in the Muslim countries, but they don't understand what has been happening. What's been happening is that religious Zionism, which is today ruling in Israel, has left no future for any Palestinian statehood. Now, the fact that the West Bank and Gaza are completely separate did not start yesterday or 10 years ago or even 20 years ago. This was the situation when Israel was created in 1948, because Israel was created in 2/3 of Palestine, leaving the West Bank with Jordan. It became part of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, and leaving Gaza under the military rule of the Egyptians. Then in 1967, Israel took the rest of Palestine, as well as Sinai. They took it from Egypt, and the Golan Heights from Syria. And the short period of time when Gaza and the West Bank became united under Israeli occupation was actually a blessing in disguise. And I explained this in a whole chapter in my book. When Sheikh Ahmad Yassin, despite having suffered paralysis, visited every single village in Palestine, both those that were occupied in 1948 and those that were occupied in 1967, to create awareness. Because you see, it was something we have to admit. We Palestinians have suffered what we have suffered because at one stage, some of us became so westernized and lost their Islamic identity. I can tell you stories about my own bringing up. I was brought up in a household that identified more with Arab nationalism than with Islam. And when I started going to the mosque at the age of 14, my father even threatened me of not allowing me back to the house, because he thought if young men go to the mosque, they are going to be they're going to be hunted by governments, and then he was going to lose his son. Such an idea, because of what Nasser did in Egypt, that people believed in the in some of what the Arab leaders were claiming, and they thought that Islam was over. Islam is something that you remember on Eid Day, Isra Mi'raj, Mawlid Nabi, but the rest of life you have to be modern in order to become advanced. And until my generation, of course it's not the first generation, there were several attempts to revive Islam from the beginning of the 20th century until today. But every time when this revival is undermined, there is another wave of revival. And I think you go and look at the Palestinians today, something completely different. You can hardly find a place in a masjid, any masjid, during regular prayers, and not just a Friday prayer. Young men and young women now identify with Islam. They've come to the conclusion that Arab nationalism was an imported evil ideology, just like secularism and all these things that contributed to the destruction of our ummah. Our connection with our brothers and sisters elsewhere in the world is much stronger than it used to be. Arab nationalism did so much harm to the Muslim ummah that we thought, because we were Arabs, or those who before us were thought that because we are Arabs, we are the best of nations. We were the best of nations because we accepted Islam, not because we were Arabs. Because Abu Jahl was an Arab, Abu Lahab was an Arab, and they are in the fire of hell. But you become the best of nations because you accept the message. This is what brought Hamas to the fore. And it's the ideology, it's the methodology, it's the vision, all together. And I think it's just a matter of time when the Palestinians will just rise, not just against Israel, but also against its own agents who are collaborating with it and who have been informing on the resistance here and there.
Thank you, Sheikh. Do you have any other questions, please? Simon? Yeah. Elia?
Azzam, I want to know from the perspective, from the Palestinians, what happened on October the 7th. We keep hearing all those,
Right.
reports, the interviews and all that. I'd like to know exactly maybe your view about, what actually, from your, from the perspective of the Palestinians, what happened on that day, and maybe a bit more information behind what they did.
Okay, and this reminds me of your second question. I didn't answer it. Well, for some time, people were divided about the 7th of October. But then, soon, the picture became clear. Maybe not to everybody, but at least to the Palestinians, to the majority of the Palestinians, the picture has become clear. What happened on the 7th of October is that Hamas led an offensive against the Israeli military posts surrounding Gaza. A number of factors, some unknown to Hamas at the time, combined together caused or turned this offensive to be one of the biggest defeats Israel suffered since its creation. First of all, there was a holiday, a 7-day holiday in Israel. And that's why an American former diplomat who once served as the American ambassador to Saudi Arabia wrote a brilliant piece on the 8th of October. I must send it to you and then you can send it to everybody. So immediately the following day, he wrote comparing what happened on the 7th of October to what he called the Tet Offensive. And I really never heard of the Tet Offensive, so I had to go and search it. And I discovered that the Tet Offensive was indeed in many ways similar to what happened on the 7th of October. The Tet Offensive happened in February, between February and August 1968. There was a holiday in Vietnam, similar to the holiday that the Israelis were having, and it had become a tradition that during that holiday, the fighting slowed down and people were given a chance to celebrate. So what the Viet Cong did, the Vietnamese revolutionaries, what they did is prepare for several months to storm a huge attack on South Vietnam. They took so many villages, they destroyed so many institutions, and the war lasted until August of that year, 1968, when the Americans managed to defeat them. Yet, what this guy says is that the Tet Offensive was the reason public opinion in America turned against the government. And calls for withdrawal from Vietnam started. Demonstrations on campuses then shifted and extended to Europe. And if some of you would probably have remembered reading or hearing about the 1968 student movement in France. Apparently it was linked to that. Eventually, the Americans had to think about ending the war. And they entered into discussions with the Viet Cong in Paris, but those failed. Eventually, in the 70s, the Americans withdrew unilaterally from Vietnam completely. Now, what he says in his piece is that just like the Tet Offensive led to the end of American imperialism in Vietnam, the 7th of October may be the beginning of the end of Zionism in Palestine.
Sure.
And look at what happened in the world. It opened people's eyes. Even the right movement in America is divided now between those who are saying Israel is our ally and we have to defend it, and those who are saying enough is enough, we shouldn't be paying any more dollars to the Americans, to the Israelis. Another resemblance to all of this is that Hamas, like the Viet Cong did, tricked the Israelis. They sent messages. The Israelis understood to mean that Hamas was more interested in running the affairs of Gaza than in waging resistance. So there were a few measures the week before. The Israelis allowed more Palestinian laborers to come into Israel from Gaza. They had banned them before. They moved many of the units that were surrounding Gaza to the West Bank because the West Bank was heating up and the settlers were preparing to storm into Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. So the Israelis, although now some of them say that they received signals that could have been taken into consideration, but nothing was taken seriously, and Hamas managed to storm. And of course, from Hamas' point of view, there was one objective really: to take prisoners, prisoners of war from among the military serving around Gaza, in order to exchange them for some of the Palestinians who are rotting in Israeli detention camps. Hamas did not expect, just like the Israelis didn't expect, the multi-billion-dollar fence to come down. There was a huge fence, electrified fence, protecting Israel from Gaza. It just came down, and tens of thousands of people of Gaza stormed into Palestine, because these were the villages of their forefathers, of their grandparents who were thrown out of Palestine. And many of the Israeli prisoners taken on that day were not taken by Hamas, they were taken by ordinary people. That's why you found women, you found children. People were there on bicycles, on motorcycles, on donkeys, and if they found Israelis, they just carried them behind them and took them in. I remember I was contacted on the 8th of October, the second day, by the British government, by people speaking on behalf of the Thai government, ask your friends in Hamas what's going on. How can we free the prisoners? What are their conditions, etc. When I asked the people I know in Hamas, they said we don't know who took who. It was like total chaos. And then Hamas warned the people there, said anybody who has a prisoner, you have until this hour of this day to hand them over. If you don't do this, this is going to be considered to be a war, etc. So it took them about a week or two to bring all these detainees together. And that's why immediately they started releasing the women and the children. I mean, on the first day they released any women and children that were taken. Now, there are so many facts that are still unknown. We know a little bit of this, we know a little bit of that. And simply because the people who planned the 7th of October were killed. They're gone. The Israelis claim they found some documents talking about certain plans, certain meetings. Maybe this will come with the passage of time. There are speculations that Hamas probably did this in order to prevent Saudi Arabia from normalizing relations with Israel, because on the 8th of October, Israel and Saudi Arabia were supposed to meet and sign the Abrahamic Accords. I don't think that was, at least my assessment, I don't think that was Hamas's objective. Their objective was to prepare for a prisoner exchange. Now, because of the Israeli reaction and the overwhelming support they received from Western governments, people became a bit skeptical later on, some people, about whether it was worth it or not. Of course, people who lost their homes, who lost many of their immediate relatives, are excused to think or to ask questions about this. But actually, if you think deeper about this, Gaza had been under siege since 2007. 2007 until 2023, complete siege. The Israelis were controlling how much water comes in, how much food comes in, how much medicine comes in, who comes out and who comes in. It's an open air prison. I mean, who wouldn't think of something like the 7th of October attack under these circumstances? Also, Hamas said that Al-Aqsa was being threatened. And Al-Aqsa is very important to the Muslims, Palestinians, the Arabs. And that's why they called it Al-Aqsa flood. They named it after Al-Aqsa. So that's really another consideration. In my assessment and the assessment of others as well, that onslaught on the 7th of October could have succeeded in freeing Gaza and liberating it completely, and probably liberating more, had the Arab governments not stood with Israel. Unfortunately, Jordan, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, all of them supported Israel in the war it carried out against Gaza. Not only that, Jordan and Egypt, the two immediate countries, wouldn't allow anything to come in, especially Egypt. The Egyptian soldiers could see Palestinians die out of hunger or being shelled to death by the Israelis, and they do nothing about it. Not open the borders, not come to the help of their brothers in whether you consider them to be Arabs or Muslims or human beings, they are your brothers. And I think if you take all account into consideration, it was a miracle. It was truly a miracle for people under siege to remain steadfast, resilient, and in resistance for 2 years with such a skewed balance of power. It's just amazing. And I think this is what drew the attention of the entire world.
Very important point that you made about this betrayal of the Arab nations against the Palestinian
Governments, not
yeah,
nations.
okay, governments against Palestinians. In fact, a friend of mine who just went to Sinai and Egypt and Sinai just recently, about a week ago, sent me a message saying that he couldn't cross into Palestine, and the Egyptian government made a kind of ruling that nothing associated with Hassan al-Banna is to be allowed, such as al-Maqsurat. Can you imagine al-Maqsurat not being allowed to go into Sinai, into Palestine? So yeah. So I think Dr. Olsi, you have a question? Yeah, you can ask.
I want to start from the Arab betrayal of the Palestinians. I'd say that the attack of Hamas on 7th of October 2023 was probably the greatest attack that Arabs have made against Israelis since the war of Yom Kippur on October 6, 1973, under Anwar. So the attack came exactly 2 years after that. But this time was much more successful. Hamas managed to break the most powerful nuclear armed state of the Middle East. And for the first year, I think the war went really well, not only for Hamas, because Hamas was not alone in this attack. Hamas was part of the axis of resistance. We had Hezbollah joining the war, the Houthis, the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad indirectly, and of course the Iranians and Iraqis. So for the first year, the war was really bad for Israelis because they had, like Netanyahu used to say, they had to fight a seven-front war. But the betrayal of the Arabs, and I will add here of the Sunni world in general, we must mention here Turkey, which even though President Erdogan stands with Palestinians, it allowed Azerbaijan to keep on sending oil to the Israeli military machine. But with things will change in 2024 with the killing of President Raisi in Iran, with the killing of several Iranian generals, with the killing of Hassan Nasrallah, and the killing of Yahya Sinwar. And I think the final death blow to the axis of resistance will come in the toppling of Bashar al-Assad on December 8, 2024. This was the longest war for Israel in its history because Israel doesn't have strategic depth. I mean, Israelis, they have nowhere to run unless to go in the Mediterranean. But the toppling of Bashar al-Assad and its celebration by the Sunni world and support by Sunnis, in a way, killed the axis of resistance. And today, 2 years and how many months? Like 1 or 2 months after, we see Hamas almost totally destroyed, Hezbollah destroyed, Houthis are isolated, Syria is gone. And Syria, I want to mind our friends here, was the last Arab state which had refused to sign a normalization agreement or peace treaty with it, even though we might not like Bashar al-Assad, but at least officially the Syrian state was still keeping its principles. And now what we see is that unfortunately the Zionists, they control us. They control America. We have seen that there is no more any international law. And what we see is that with the collapse of the axis of resistance, my doubt is that not only Hamas will be wiped off the map, but Palestinians as well. There is no any country to stand behind the Palestinians. That you had the Arabs until before the Arab Spring. people from Gaddafi to Bashar al-Assad with all their evil doings in one way or another, they were giving some kind of at least moral support to Palestinians. But today the situation looks very desperate. And I think, or like President Trump told to Netanyahu when he went to the Knesset, he told to him, you have to smile because you won. You defeated Hezbollah, Hamas, you toppled Bashar al-Assad, Syria is yours, and only Iran is left, and then they had the 12 days of war with Iran. So the fear that I have, and I want to ask you is, what do you think will be the future of the Palestinian cause? Because look, I mean, you mentioned before the history of Fatah. In 1960s and 70s, the fighters of Fatah, even though, like you mentioned, they were secularists, they were really motivated and they were believing in their cause to liberate Palestine. And then with the Camp David Accords, the great betrayal started by Arab secularism. And then Islamism came to replace Arab secularism. But the question is, who is going to back the Palestinians today? All Sunni countries, without exception, have sold out the Palestinian cause. Iran, which officially still supports the Palestinian cause, is in a crisis of existence. And what the Zionists and Netanyahu they are planning and they are aiming to do is to topple the Islamic Republic, because they think that at the moment they'll topple the Islamic Republic, there will be no power left on this planet which is going to save not only the Palestinians but Masjid al-Aqsa. I've been to Masjid al-Aqsa, I've been in Jerusalem, I've seen the tunnels that they have made under Masjid al-Aqsa. It needs only a small bombing and Aqsa will collapse. And the project of these messianic Zionists, like Netanyahu, is that they believe that they have to destroy Aqsa and to have a final solution for the Palestinians, which is their total expulsion, probably in Somaliland, and the building of the Temple of Solomon in order to have their Messiah come back.
Well, regarding the axis of resistance, I think the axis of resistance collapsed with the Arab Spring. It remained on paper, but in reality, it lost its practicality and effectiveness, simply because Bashar al-Assad decided to wage war on his own people. And Syria lost its previous position, which you described, but came to an end with the Arab Spring, in my opinion. It remained an ally of the Iranians, that is true. It remained the lung through which Hezbollah breathed. But at the same time, Bashar al-Assad's Syria was the one that led to the eventual destruction of Hezbollah. Because Hezbollah's involvement in Syria resulted in undermining it in a variety of ways, including infiltration, which led to the scandals of the pagers and the walkie-talkies that eliminated a good number of their field workers as well as their leaders. Now, the Iranians have their own problems. Of course, Iran supported the Palestinian cause, etc., but Iran apparently was not in favor of a major attacks on Israel like the 7th of October. One of the documents that the New York Times published talks about a meeting in Beirut that was attended by one Hamas major or main figure, who is Khalil al-Hayya, who is now the successor of Sinwar in Gaza, but he lives outside, and representatives of Hezbollah and the Iranians. And he hinted in that meeting, according to this document, that if we were to do something like this and that, describing a similar attack, would our allies stand with us? And apparently the response was that this was something that needed to be thoroughly thought about. There can be repercussions, etc. You know, because the way states think is different from the way movements and individuals think. So the Iranians were hoping to reach some sort of understanding on their problems with the Americans and didn't want something major like this to happen. But really, to answer your question, it doesn't matter who supports the Palestinians and who doesn't support the Palestinians. What matters first and foremost is the vision of the Palestinians. Is it still intact, or has it been disrupted or undermined? This is for me is the major criterion. Of course, it helps if you have more people supporting you, but it doesn't mean an end, even if nobody supports you from around you, so long as you have that clarity of vision about your objective, about your reason that, about what you happen to be there for. Within Hamas itself now, there are really discussions about exactly this matter, because there was a time when Iran was the only country that seemed to support Hamas. But that turned out not to be free of charge. The Iranians wanted to control decision making within Hamas. The Iranians had an experience with Islamic Jihad. When they embraced Islamic Jihad or adopted it, because Islamic Jihad preceded Hamas. Islamic Jihad came into existence in the early 80s. The Iranians made it a condition and succeeded that eventually they have a say in the policy and in the vision of the movement. When Hamas came to the scene, the Iranians wanted to do the same thing. Hamas leadership at the time refused and said, we are a Palestinian movement and we would expect help and support from the Arabs and the Muslims, but no intervention. And this continued to be the case until an increasing number of the Arab countries started fighting Hamas, labeling it as a terrorist organization, restricting its activities, imprisoning its members, like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and others. And that's when the Iranian role became much more clearer and much more effective. And a current within Hamas has become more loyal to the Iranians, or more willing to accommodate the Iranians. I mean, to put it right, more willing to accommodate the Iranians. But I think this has come to nearly an end with the assassination of Sinwar and Ismail Haniyeh. Because it turned out the Iranians have major problems. They lost so many of their scientists. They lost so many of their leaders. They lost their main ally in Lebanon, Hezbollah, and it is all because of Mossad infiltrations. Iran is deeply infiltrated by Mossad. That's terrible. And that was mainly because of intervention in Syria. The Iranian role in fighting the Syrian revolution, siding by Bashar al-Assad, resulted in this. And now it is the Iranians and Hezbollah who are admitting that it was senior officials in the Syrian government who actually turned to be Israeli collaborators and who caused that sort of infiltration that removed thousands within days. They were eliminated. So I think Hamas is recalibrating, recalculating, and reconsidering its position. I think the Palestinians should never repeat the mistakes of some of their earlier factions that relied solely or heavily on governments. You cannot trust governments because governments have their priorities. If they want to give you aid, it should be unconditional. And the Palestinian cause shouldn't be allowed to be seized upon and confiscated by any government in the region, because they will use it for their own ends. Jamal Abdel Nasser did that. Sadat did that. Gaddafi did that. Saddam Hussein did that. Assad did that. The Iranians did that. So it's very dangerous. So I think now, and by the way, now these days Hamas will have their leadership elections for the first time in, I think, in 8 or 9 years, because they couldn't because of the war, it was delayed. They're having the elections right now. And this has been one of the main issues that is discussed behind the scene. Where do we go from here? What sort of relationships, etc., etc., etc. For me, what is reassuring is that despite all the betrayals and the losses, the vision has not been affected. That's really what matters, because you can recruit soldiers. You can find ways of bringing weapons in the future if you need to. You can do all what is necessary, provided your vision is still intact.
Dr. Gossi, are you satisfied?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, my question is what will happen with the Palestinian resistance, because, I mean, it seems like Israel won the war.
No, that's not true. Israel had, when Israel waged war on Gaza, it had two objectives: bring back the hostages and destroy Hamas. They could not bring the hostages back through military operations.
But through the pressure of Sunni Turkey and Qatar, who forced Hamas to release the hostages.
No, they did not force them.
I mean, at least this is what many medias have shown.
No, it's not true.
It was a pressure from Turkey in particular towards Hamas leadership, and from Qatar as well, to release the hostages. And for me, this was the greatest mistake that Hamas made. They should have never let the hostages go, because this was the only card they were holding. They were keeping against Netanyahu.
Yeah, but they took the hostages in order to exchange them for Palestinian hostages.
And they didn't.
Of course they did.
But not all that they wanted, number one. And number two is Gaza is occupied, is under, Israeli siege. I don't think that they achieved what they intended.
Who? Hamas, you mean?
Hamas.
Hamas, this is a long struggle. This is not going to end. But I'm talking about the Israelis. The Israelis had two objectives, which they failed to achieve through war. And that's why they eventually signed the ceasefire or settled for the ceasefire agreement. Of course, the Israelis cannot be trusted and cannot be believed. And the war is still continuing. Every day there are people who are getting killed. People are dying because of the cold, because of the war, because of the rain, because Israel is not allowing caravans to come in, is not allowing reconstruction. Yes, this is all happening. But I think in the eventual reckoning, Israel was the loser in this war. They couldn't, their military might could not achieve for them for 2 years what was achieved through negotiations. And then at the level of public opinion around the world today knows Israel better than at any time before. And the nature of Zionism has been exposed. And the hypocrisy of the supporters of Israel has been exposed. I mean, these are important successes. But with regarding to Qatar and Turkey, although I agree with you that Turkey should have been more forthcoming in boycotting Israel, yet during the war in the region, Hamas and the Palestinians had only two allies, Qatar and Turkey.
All right. Do you have any other questions from anyone else? Yes, very well.
I know Dr. Azzam Tamimi from a very long time, and I have been meeting him. I personally met Sheikh Ahmed Yassin and Qatar was, and what is going on in the region, especially Arabs we know, especially I don't expect anything, and I don't hope that Egypt will play any significant role into it. But what about Jordan? Hashemites, they are Arabs. And we are talking about Palestine. We are not talking about Zionists or whatever. That's fine. Few questions my brother has raised in a very good way. I can say thank you very much. Dr. Tamimi, I just want to make it sure for the public over here that what is the difference between Hamas and Hezbollah? First question. Second thing, other people from this region, we went through with the boats and people went through with to putting them in their lives in danger to reach Palestine, to support Palestinian people. Is that true? Fine. Why not Jordan or neighboring countries allow them to come directly to help Palestinians? Thank you very much.
Well, Jordan as a country was created by the British, who created Israel in the first place. Jordan was meant to be a buffer zone to provide protection for this Zionist project right from its early inception. Nothing has changed. I mean, Jordan as a country is unviable. It relies on money coming from abroad. Without Western support, the regime cannot guarantee its existence. And therefore, they don't really have the freedom to decide what they do, because they were created in the first place for this purpose. We can argue about whether it would have been better if they didn't do this or if they did that. That's right. And I think the current government in Jordan could have done much better with less damage to its reputation. But they didn't. I think King Hussein was a lot wiser than his son. He knew how to maintain a balance between winning public opinion and at the same time fulfilling his responsibilities toward the Western supporters who support his monarchy. But I think this situation cannot be sustained for much longer. Not only Jordan, but in the entire region. The Arab state, the modern Arab state, is a failing state. It cannot maintain itself. It cannot provide its citizens with their essential needs, and continue to be dependent upon foreign donors. What sort of a state is this? Therefore, I think, and especially recently with the decision after the king returned from his meeting with Trump in the White House, and he declared the Muslim Brotherhood an illegitimate organization, ordered the imprisonment of some of their leaders and spokespersons. That has been infuriating for many people in Jordan. Jordan relies on a number of things. In addition to Western support, it relies on the tribal support in that part of the world, and I think it never happened before that the regime in Jordan went against a main component of the political spectrum in this way, and this is likely to backfire, if not immediately, in the medium term. But look, Israel and Jordan came together, and Israel and Jordan, their fate is linked together, simply because Jordan as an entity, if it remains the way it is today, it cannot act as a front for resistance. It's impossible. It doesn't have the capacity to do this. Although I'm sure that the majority of the people in Jordan would love to rush to the aid of their brothers and sisters. But I'm talking about the system and the state that was the product of Sykes-Picot.
difference between Hamas and Hezbollah?
Well, Hezbollah came into existence because the Israelis had occupied Lebanon in 1982. Prior to Hezbollah, there was the Amal movement. But the people who founded Hezbollah felt that the Amal was no longer fulfilling their needs. Hezbollah, from day number one, was clearly an Iranian ally and even an organ of the Iranians, fully supported, funded, and even dictated to by the Iranians. And Hezbollah served the Shiite community of Lebanon very well. It raised their living standards because they were marginalized before. It gave them a voice. I think Hezbollah started losing its good image, and it was one day an emblem of resistance for everybody in the region when it joined Bashar al-Assad's regime in cracking down upon the Syrian People's Revolution. That was the beginning of their demise. Had they remained a Lebanese resistance movement, I think they would not have suffered the way they suffered afterwards. And that's why Hamas has been very careful not to intervene in the affairs of Arab governments, not to become part of the Axis, although of course it's usually referred to as a member of the resistance axis. And I think this is a theoretical thing. But in reality, it refused to side by a certain government against another, and it refused to remain in Syria in 2011 because the Syrians and the Iranians wanted it to side by the regime against the people. So they said, no, we cannot do this. We'd rather lose all the privileges we had, and they had lots of privileges given to them by the Assad regime. They gave up on all these privileges in order not to embroil themselves in the war against the Syrian people. And that's why later on there was so much discussion, as I referred earlier, as to the nature of the relationship with Iran. Okay, you can appreciate the help Iran gives. You can insist upon Iran as upon every other Muslim country, Pakistan, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Arab countries, that it's your duty to stand by us, to support us in this struggle. But not in exchange for being dictated to. Because the day you allow them to dictate to you, that's going to be very dangerous. And this is what happened to the PLO. Fatah and the PLO became so many factions, one belonging to Nasser, one belonging to Assad, one belonging to Saddam Hussein, one belonging to Jordan. And they were playing with the Palestinian cause. You cannot afford to do this.
Thank you, Sheikh. Do you have any questions from the ladies? Farah? Anyone else before we close the session? Yeah, Azli. Yep.
Is there anything positive that we can expect from the recent ceasefire? For the fact that this broken anything initiated by US is always wasted money. Is there any positivity at all? Or anything that we can expect from this? Secondly, what's the main reason why Hamas agreed to the terms of the ceasefire in the first place? Because look at the terms, it is really one-sided. I'm wondering, is there any wisdom at all that Hamas would agree to these terms?
Well, the ceasefire was demanded by all parties, but with different levels of seriousness and readiness to commit. It's not the idea of a ceasefire that is wrong, but it's what you agree to or you don't agree to. If you're referring to the 21 points that Trump submitted and became 20 points 24 hours later, Trump assembled the Arab and Muslim leaders who were in New York and proposed a plan to them. And the plan seemed reasonable from their point of view, so they agreed to it. The following day, Netanyahu came, and together with Kushner and what's his name, Trump's Witkoff, they changed the points. They omitted point number 21 and rewrote many of the other points in order to make it look as if it were surrender by Hamas and acceptance of the Israeli conditions. Now Hamas was given the points and they spent several days studying them, I think about a week maybe. And then they came out with the following declaration that these points are essentially about two things. Things that are Hamas's affairs and things that are the Palestinian people's affairs. And because Hamas cannot negotiate on behalf of the Palestinian people, anything that is to do with the Palestinian people will have to be submitted to the Palestinian people. Therefore you need to have a democratically elected leadership representing the Palestinians to decide on these points. That was a clever way of evading what was being what they were attempting to impose on them. As for the points that deal with Hamas directly, including disarmament and things like that, they said each of these points is a headline, and we need to discuss and negotiate, because these headlines mean nothing. You can have them as a headline for an article, but where is the article? And that's why they entered into negotiations in Cairo that lasted several days. My assessment is that Hamas has not agreed to any point that can be interpreted as surrender or capitulation. It agreed to the points that would reduce the suffering, the daily suffering of the Palestinians. And this is what happened. Of course, they know the Israelis. They know that the Israelis don't commit, they don't fulfill, they are liars. They're compulsive liars. That's their nature. They lied about God. Why don't they lie about God's creatures? But it's when you are alone and you are in a very difficult position, so long as you don't give up on your objective, on your vision, you can maneuver. And this is what they're doing. They're maneuvering to bring in food. They're maneuvering to bring in medicines. They're maneuvering to end the assassinations. They're maneuvering to end the siege if they could. So it's not really an easy thing. It's miraculous. It's really miraculous. You had another question?
Entering into the phase 2. So,
Phase 2.
yeah.
Yeah.
So what is that going to happen in first place?
We don't know. I mean, Trump invited Netanyahu. According to some of what was published in the Israeli press and in the American press, the whole idea of inviting him for talks is to tell him that he has exceeded what was agreed upon and that he has to start entering into phase 2 and fulfill what they agreed to fulfill. But of course, in front of the media, they all boast about being victorious and being this and being that. So apart from that, I don't really know. But Hamas is willing to enter into phase number 2. Now, the problem is that phase number 2 is making so many assumptions that are impractical. They want to bring a foreign body to rule Gaza. The Israelis couldn't rule Gaza. How are you going to bring some Europeans and some Arabs and some Muslims from here and there? They're talking about a foreign military power, stabilization power. Until now, they haven't had commitments from countries, although Trump has been talking a lot about this, or Muslim countries have agreed on this. It's not easy. Hamas has been very clear about this. If any foreign power comes in, whether it is Arab or Islamic or anything, that whose mission or mandate is to do for Israel what Israel failed to do, we are going to fight them. It's very clear. So don't mess with us. That's what they're saying. Demilitarization, also very clear. They said we will only hand over our weapons to a Palestinian national leadership. They don't mean the one in Ramallah. They mean one that is agreed upon by the Palestinian people. So you see, sometimes in the media, it depends on which media you're following, they try to convince readers or viewers that it was Israel that came out victorious out of this. I don't think so. Israel managed to destroy Gaza. That is true. Israel managed to weaken Hamas. That is true. But Israel has not killed the spirit of resistance, even among ordinary Gazans. Not only that, Israel and America and the rest of the world doesn't have a practical solution to the problem in Gaza, because they don't want to solve the problem in Gaza. At one time they want to turn it into a Riviera. At another they want to turn it into I don't know what. There's nothing really clear. And Hamas is still there. I don't know in terms of military capabilities. I'm sure they're much weaker. But there are reports in the Israeli press, according to intelligence sources, that they are very quickly replacing, recruiting, and etc. Look, in a nutshell, my grandfather was in the resistance. My father was in the resistance. My generation is in the resistance. My children and my grandchildren will be in the resistance. It's not going to be over until Zionism is no more.
If I may add,
Yes.
in Abin's masjid tourism program, it has seen a 30% increase in conversions of foreign tourists who visit the masjid because of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So that is a sign of the effect of the Gaza conflict.
Indeed.
So it is not a simple understanding of what is victory in this conflict would not be suitable, because it has achieved much more than we could ever imagine. Like last week, we had a family of 3, father, mother and son. And then a journalist from Mexico who converted, Russian. Every week, so many people converting to Islam because of the reading up on Islam after what's happened in Gaza.
I think Gaza is changing the world.
Yes.
Inshallah.
All right.
And also
One.
Muslims as well.
Yeah. Okay. One last question before we close the session. If you have any questions. None. Okay. So we can. We're about to finish the session. I'd like to say thank you to Brother Azzam Tamimi for all your input and insights. And I think it's very important. Your last words were very strong and powerful. That the resistance is going to be there. I always say to some of my non-Muslim friends, we grew up, our generation, we grew up during the time of Star Wars. Star Wars with Luke Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi, and we were always with the side of the resistance against the Galactic Empire. Why are we not against the resistance now? We are always with the resistance. So with that, I would like to say thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. And inshallah we close with tasbih kifara.
سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.